making a movie physically and mentally destroys you. You know, it just does.
It becomes such a labor of love that sometimes we neglect to look at it as a business.
People lock into this idea that there is a correct way to do things. There's not. There's a million ways to do it.
Video has become the most effective way to get people to do something that it is you want them to do.
It's time for Filmmakers to Get Real with Jeffrey Michael Bays and Forris Day Jr.
Welcome back to the podcast, Get Real Indie Filmmakers. You can tweet us at BorgesFilm if you don't like what we're doing. Just go ahead and complain. We have every avenue for you to do that. Email us privately at info@borges.com. By the way, Forris is back. You have returned after a brief hiatus.
Yeah, it wasn't that I ever left anywhere. It's just that my ability to communicate was gone because my computer crashed.
Yeah, we were talking to William Dickerson, and all of a sudden you lost your computer.
And the audio.
Yeah.
So William was great.
You're using a Mac, so
yeah,
probably not a surprise.
It was an old Mac. I mean, the average person would have went through 3 Windows computers in the time that other MacBook lasted. So.
Well, our guest today is William Dickerson. He is back. We have finished the interview with him, and it's a good one. We're going to be talking about directing today, and we're going to ask him about the process of casting Kathryn Erbe. Now, you may not know who Kathryn Erbe is just by her name, but you probably would recognize her from Law & Order. Criminal Intent, I think, is the one she was on. And also a classic, What About Bob? She was the daughter. Mm-hmm. She's in his film No Alternative, which is a great film, by the way. I don't know if you've seen it, Forrest.
I've seen part of it,
but it is available now on streaming, and it will be available on Amazon Prime in a couple of weeks, I think. Mm-hmm. But it's a great film, and it's a surprising film because what happens is you're expecting something to happen, and then something else completely different happens. I know I'm being vague intentionally because I don't want to spoil it, but. It's definitely a nice, great indie film that captures the feel of the 90s. And if you like 90s music, this is definitely the film to take a look at.
Yeah, it looks well done from what I've seen.
Another thing that you are working on, and I think we're getting closer to this happening, we've been talking about this probably since the first episode, is that you're doing a special interview about gaffer tape.
Yeah, and I've been working on this for like a year. We've talked about it, you and I, for about a year. I finally got Marty from Gaffer Power. It's a company that sells all kinds of tape, but we're going to talk about how valuable gaff tape or gaffer tape is on a film set and all the other uses you can use it for. It's an amazing. And
this is the kind of thing that nobody else talks about. You're not going to hear this anywhere else.
But
on any other podcast.
If there's a filmmaker out there who has never used gaffer tape, they're going to be amazed. Any professional filmmaker has used it, but it's the new guys. I mean, they're going to be like, well, I use duct tape for that. No. So we're going to learn about that. That interview is going to happen. By the time this one's released, it will have happened. And it will be interesting.
I hope so.
And hey, maybe we'll come up with a way to give away some rolls of gaffer tape too. We'll see what we can do. Marty's already agreed to hook us up with some prizes.
Speaking of our listeners, since we have switched our platform of our streaming hosting service, we actually have data about our listeners.
Wow.
So where do you think our listeners, most of them, which countries do you think our listeners are from?
Oh, this is a trick question because you want me to say United States and or Canada.
And you'd be right.
Oh, okay.
There's nothing surprising there.
Oh, okay.
But what do you think the second most populous country of our listener base is?
I'll say the UK.
Well, it's on there.
England.
But Australia and Spain are tied for number 2.
Oh, that's interesting.
So we have listeners in Spain. That's a little bit of a surprise.
Shout out to Spain.
Yeah.
Shout out
Canada.
To Australia. Shout out to Canada. Hi, guys.
And United Kingdom. A few listeners in Denmark. So that's That's interesting. We did have one listener in Bahrain, which I think
That's cool.
Is the interesting one. Yeah, and I had to actually look to see where that was. It's actually in the Persian Gulf. So
That's kind of cool to know that, hopefully we're helping people all over the world, or at least angering them.
Angering them, yes. And we also do have a heat map where it shows clusters of where the people are in the United States that are listening.
Oh, that's cool.
And no surprise that we do hit all the major filmmaking areas like Los Angeles, New York, Houston, a little bit in Atlanta, some in Chicago,
New Mexico.
But we are hitting the kind of the smaller communities as well, like Colorado, Ohio, Indiana, Minnesota. So there's a Midwestern representation here. So yeah, I think we're reaching a pretty broad swath.
Anybody listening,
of
if you're
filmmakers.
put in the comments where you live, just put where you live. Say, hi, I'm from Atlanta, or I'm from, or wherever you're from. That would be cool. I want to hear from where people live.
Yeah. So thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes and leave us a star rating there, and tweet us at BorgesFilm with all of your ideas for show topics, and email us at info@borges.com. Well, Forris, good to have you back. We're going to take a little break here, and we're going to talk with William Dickerson, and we want to ask him about the casting process of Kathryn Erbe, and also what it's like to direct a period piece. His film goes back 20 years, which presents some complications with, set design and costumes on a low budget. So we'll talk with William Dickerson of the New York Film Academy right after this.
That's one thing Alfred Hitchcock was really good at, creating suspense with a camera. For the last couple of years, I've been teaching Hitchcock suspense techniques at festivals like Buffalo, St. Louis, Palm Springs, Los Angeles. Filmmakers are learning easy tricks for building suspense that are so easy to implement. Now there's a way for you to get access in my new book, Suspense with a Camera. It's available in bookstores now. And don't miss our free docuseries on YouTube called Hitch 20.
Short-term obsession, borderline of sin, beyond for the weekend. That's where it ends, and I'm still waiting for my time with you.
We're joined by William Dickerson of the New York Film Academy in Los Angeles. He wrote and directed 2 feature films, Detour, which was out a couple of years ago, maybe a little bit longer, and the new film that he just released, No Alternative. Will, thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here.
So first of all, I want to get into some directing questions, about casting and working with Kathryn Erbe and all of that. But first of all, tell us how to get copies of these films.
Well, they're available on a variety of different platforms. Your best bet, I think, is to go to Amazon, where they have both movies, Detour and No Alternative. You can rent or buy them. The DVD and Blu-ray are also available. And as well are my book and soundtrack to the film. So there's kind of a multimedia assault of No Alternative happening right now, which I've never done before with any of my films, but it's really quite exciting.
By the way, before we go any further, that song we just heard was called Chummin' from Latter-day Saints. Now, that's an original song, right?
Yes, it is. It was written over 20 years ago by my band, my grunge band back in the day.
And so that's actually in the film.
Yeah, we just kind of did it, and we said to each other, we're going to use this in a movie 20 years from now.
Well, I was going to say, great job on mimicking the 90s style, but apparently all the music actually is from the 90s in the movie.
Yeah, exactly. I would say there are some tracks here and there that are technically not, but it's very difficult to tell. I mean, we're talking about within like a Well, actually, no, I'm sorry. They are all from the 90s. They're just not all from 1994, where the movie takes place.
Yeah.
There's like one or two. There may be 95, but no one will ever know. They're still very much within the same style. But I am in love with the 90s. I mean, I always have been. I mean, I know every generation kind of feels the same way about the moment, that time in their lives when they grew up and came of age. But I truly believe that there really hasn't been a more important pop cultural moment than the 90s. And to go back there in this movie has been a pretty wild ride.
Now, why do you say important? Because of the suicide thing? Is that what you're getting at, or?
Well, I mean, I think just the changes in music and movies, specifically at the time, where it was just like the indie revolution of films, and music really, it took such a turn from the 80s. It kind of wiped away all the pop pablum that the 80s delivered, and gave us something totally new and refreshing, that spoke to the alienation of the youth at the time. And this was a time period where everybody was supposed to be great. The kids of the baby boomers were, going to do better than the previous generation, and they didn't have to worry behind their white picket fences. But guess what? Teenagers have problems, but they felt like they couldn't talk about their problems, and felt alone. But they were, through the music, they were able to come together, because really the music of the time, you go back there and listen to the mood, the tone, listen to the lyrics, and really it's so much of it is about depression, about suicide, about subjects that teenagers were afraid to talk about. So they really found a place in this music. So I think that was extremely important, and certainly in my life very relevant.
I find that interesting because I feel the same way about the 80s that you feel about the 90s. And when you're saying this, I'm like, wait a minute,
no.
the pablum. Like, I love the 80s, and I graduated early in 1982. So you're right, though, that the time you grow up in is amazing. The music is amazing. And the 80s music is so different than the 70s I talked to my parents. My mom loved the 50s. So every decade is special to each person. And I find that
Agreed.
Interesting that you said that, Will.
Yeah, well, there are some good bands that came out of the 80s. There's
there was
Police,
like two.
You too, the Police, The Cure,
The Police.
Smiths. I mean, new wave was. I think that the better movement of the 80s, I mean, I'm really talking about the kind of Def Leppards and White Snakes and Motley Crues and those types of, where while some songs are enjoyable, there really isn't much depth to that music, in my opinion.
And I think we all kind of assume at the time that we're growing up, the music that's out there, that's popular, that music is always going to be like that. And when it goes away, you feel an absence. Is music just not really that good anymore? Or is it just because of our perspective?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question, because I think about that often, and there's a part of me that says, it's getting older, and I'm getting to the point of yelling, "Get off my lawn!" to people outside my house. But I really do believe, like, objectively, I mean, there have been great bands, great songs that have come around, but just as a movement in music, there hasn't been another one of that magnitude since. I mean, I think I consider that a fact. Hopefully, there will be at some point. The world as it is now, particularly in the United States, seems ripe for a new punk rock movement. But if there is one, I haven't been made aware of it.
So how tough is it to direct a film that takes place in the past? This goes back 20 years. For costumes and set design. Is it tough to do?
Yeah, I mean, and any period piece is going to be difficult. I mean, you're automatically adding to the budget, the time, the prep time, because you're right. You have to create a lot of costumes from scratch because they don't exist anymore. But the thing is, the 90s really isn't that difficult, at least right now. If if you shoot in certain points of in particular places, right, where the architecture really hasn't changed that much. There are lots of places around the United States where that's the case. In Yonkers, New York, where I grew up, there are a lot of neighborhoods that are very static in terms of their aesthetics and have been that way for the past 30, 40 years. So it was pretty easy to find the right locations. And as far as costume goes, for the 90s, vintage shops, I mean, there you walk in, you could get, you know, a whole plethora of different grunge outfits. I mean, it's basically the same thing. It's kind of the same style now, except not nearly as baggy, right? So it was baggier in the 90s, but it's these jeans, Converses, cardigan sweaters, you know, Doc Martens, all those things are still here. They're just tighter.
Yeah, for sure.
The biggest logistical hurdle was the cars outside, right? So, you know, I mean, Priuses didn't exist in the 90s, so having one in the background would be a pretty big faux pas in this film. So we kind of went out of our way to find streets that didn't have cars, or shoot when they did, shoot with real long lenses so, you know, we can blur out the background because of the narrow depth of field. We even had to do a little bit of visual effects in post to blur out cars more so they wouldn't be a distraction. And yeah, we had a few hero cars where the characters are driving them, and we had to like double or triple them occasionally for background. Sometimes they're in the foreground, main character driving them. Sometimes they're also in the parked in the background, blocking a Prius so we can see it.
So how did the actors feel about dressing in that 90s style? Because I know that we shot a scene last year for Not From Space, the movie that I've been working on for a long time, and it takes place in the 90s as well. And I found that, well, I was surprised, and I probably shouldn't have been surprised, that the younger people on set didn't understand the clothing styles. So there was a lot of education that needed to happen. How did your actors feel about that? Was there a learning curve, or did it come naturally?
Well, you know what? It came really naturally. Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, Harry and Kathryn, so they're, you know, older actors. I mean, not so old, but they lived through the 90s and they remember it quite well. You know, and they're playing conservative parents, so it was, you know, suits and, you know, for Kathryn, fairly conservative blouses and pants and skirts and whatnot. So there wasn't much to their costumes. Really, the real detail went into the teenagers' costumes. But funny enough, like these kids, they're dressing like the 90s now. I mean, Michaela, who plays Bridget, like, I mean, literally, when I met her, like, every time I met her, she was in a different outfit that she wears all the time. That's right out of the 90s. So it's ridiculous. So they all were aware of the clothing trends from that period, and a lot of them were actually wearing them currently. So it really wasn't an issue at all.
Did you have somebody on set that just walks around and makes sure there's nothing from the future, like, you know, make sure there's no coffee cups, like Game of Thrones kind of thing?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That duty primarily went to our production designer and costume designer. It should really go to the script supervisor, but we could not afford to hire one. So, like, continuity and those types of things were... You know, I mean, luckily, like, I know the 90s very well, and a lot of my crew did. So we got pretty lucky. I mean, there were a couple of things here and there that we figured out, you know, in the post, but we were able to cut around it or blur it or whatever. Though there's a neat story about M&M's, though, where we were filming a scene in Jackie's parents' house when she invites Thomas over on their date with her parents in their living room. And on the coffee table in the foreground is a crystal bowl filled with M&Ms. And we were starting to film it, and my first AD points to the bowl and says, "Blue M&Ms didn't come out till 1995." And there's blue M&Ms in there. I'm like, everyone's looking at him like he's a nutcase. But sure enough, like, he was right. Took out all the blue M&Ms. We looked it up. Yeah, it didn't come out till a year later. So he was his hawk eyes were watching over things, and, you know, so things like that. Stuff like that makes me proud, because it's like, okay, we're really sticking as close as possible to the the real authentic version of the '90s that I remember.
Because if you had blue M&Ms, and Twitter would go nuts, right?
It would just the movie would be a total failure.
Yes, exactly.
I can see the headline: Dickerson, hack filmmaker, blue M&Ms in his film.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I did. Although I didn't put any remember trolls were a big thing back in the '90s. Those dolls, the trolls. Now they're electronic trolls. I should have put some in the movie, but I did not.
Mm-hmm.
So no, it was a lot of fun, and I actually I've kept things from the '90s, specific objects or musical equipment, clothes, and they kind of pop up in the film. Like some of the actors are wearing my clothes sometimes, so it's funny. But as like you mentioned about the M&Ms, we of course we got a few random comments online about how that doesn't look like that's not the '90s. It doesn't look like the '90s I went through, and I'm like, well. They're wearing my clothes from the '90s, so it's hard to. I don't know what your '90s was like, but sometimes people have different lives, and
they blur together.
Remembrances.
Sometimes what you remember as the '90s was the the ones, as it's called, or or it could have been the '80s. You just don't know.
Memory is subjective.
Yeah, memories. We tend to remember the good things.
Yes. Yes, indeed. So, that was a fun challenge, and it really didn't slow us down much. It didn't add too much to the budget.
So, a very low budget. Can you tell us any details about the budget, or?
Well, I can't tell you what the movie was made for, but it's pretty much in the movie world the equivalent. It's equivalent to a handful of peanuts, probably. It's certainly a micro budget, right?
Okay.
So it's low. It's above or below, somewhere around $1 million, somewhere above or below that. So and a lot because the movie looks very expensive. There's lots of great production value, great cast. A lot of that's through favors and just through my experience with Detour. We made Detour for nothing. I could say how much that was $40,000, right? And we ended up selling it for 6 times as much and got worldwide distribution through Gravitas Ventures and Warner Brothers. So, and I kind of got a reputation from that as being a director that can do a lot with a little, because that's a movie that does not look like 40 grand. So I've been able to make these movies on relatively low budgets, very, very low budgets, and make them look, 3-4 times more expensive than what they were to make, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. It's great. It's I'm flattered by that, and it's great to have a reputation that's positive, of course, but as a filmmaker and as a growing filmmaker, you want to get much higher budgets. Like, you don't want, or a production company to keep giving you, here's the lowest we can offer because we know you can make it look like 1,000 times more. Okay, well, that's great, but I want more money so I can make an even bigger movie, and actually get paid a much better salary, So it's that's the sort of blessing and curse of that.
Well, with that being said, Will, can you talk about some of the equipment you use, the cameras, the audio?
Sure.
Talk about that a little bit.
Well, we shot on the Red Dragon, and I've used various versions of the Red for every movie that I've made. My cinematographer, Rob Craich, who I went to AFI with, he was one of the first one of the first people to ever get a Red, and so he's an expert in that camera and its technology. And that worked really great. It's some say it's a little it's not the best camera in low light, but we had a few scenes that were lower lit, and we didn't have that much equipment, G&E equipment to deal with, but still, we were going for a gritty, dark look that worked great. We also used these lenses, which are called Trump lenses, and I'm not joking when I say that. These actually came out before Trump was even running for president, but essentially they are lenses. They're Russian lenses that have been retrofitted to incorporate rear elements that have shapes. So basically what that means is, if you have a long lens, a regular lens, it's like an 85 or 100 something millimeter, and you have a low aperture and your you're shooting something, you're gonna have a very narrow depth of field, and if you're shooting into lights, you're gonna see what's called a bokeh, which are kind of little dots of light in the background. It squeezes the light and makes a shape of the aperture, and the aperture is like typically an octagon. So that's why you'll see octagonal shapes of light in the background. Now, what this company did, which is great, they were able to you're able to insert shapes to change the bokeh. So all of a sudden, if you have a shot like that, you can make the bokeh triangular, or you can make them square, or you can make them this or that. So what we did with that, we were able to code characters and story arc with the bokeh. And it's a very subconscious thing, right? But the triangular elements were used with all the family together. And later on, after, I'm not going to say who died, but there's a specific character who dies, then the bokeh all goes to these kind of like bars, right? These streaks, because we wanted to kind of convey this feeling of prison. And it was a really interesting way to work. And it also helped us really define define the arcs and define how we're going to express those arcs visually. When are they going to really contrast throughout in the movie, and then when are they going to come closer together, and when are they going to contrast again? So it was a very interesting way to deal with the visuals.
That is fascinating. Is that commonly done, or is this something you came up with?
No, it's very uncommon. These lenses are very rare. I think there's a big wait list because you have to custom order them, and it takes like a year and a half. And we couldn't. My DP wanted to buy them. There's no way to buy them, but I happened to knew a camera assistant in LA who I'd worked with before, who owns a set of them, and he rents them out. So we were able to, he rented them to us, and that was one of our main technical tools that we use to define character.
So now you got to watch the movie in a whole different light, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly.
Pun intended.
Although it's very subconscious, but I will tell you, when we premiered the film at Dances with Films at the Chinese Theater, one of the questions afterwards was talk about the bokeh. So someone recognized it. So that's like, what eyes? Jeez.
First of all, get a life. Now, second of all, let's talk about it.
Yeah. So my DP was very pleased with that question.
Oh,
so
I can imagine.
Talk. Yeah, he doesn't usually get questions at these types of Q&As.
Yeah, that's cool. That is cool. I'm amazed.
Yeah, me too.
So. Now, you had a couple of stars, Kathryn Erbe and Harry Hamlin.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the process of attaching them? How early did they come on board? And what's the process of casting them?
It's a good question. I mean, well, the process of casting. Let me speak generally first. And this is a little bit crazy to hear, but this is the way it works in indie film. When you want to cast well-known actors in an indie film, they may very well do your film because they want to do good work, and they want to make as much material as possible. If they love the script and they like your vision, they might very well sign on. But at the independent film level, particularly the micro budget level, you're not dealing with a lot of money to offer them. So what happens is, if you have an offer out to an actor, they're really not going to say yes until right before you need them to shoot, because they want to keep their schedule open, just in their agents make them do this. They want to keep their schedule open just in case they get that commercial gig that pays a lot more money. So it's very rare that an actor of their caliber is going to commit to a movie like this weeks or months in advance, right? Which I can see that. I can see the logic behind that. The problem for the filmmaker, of course, is you're starting the movie already. Like, for instance, we started shooting the movie. We have like a 3.5 week shoot, and 2 weeks into the shoot, we still haven't locked down two of the leads, right? Because no one will commit to this movie 2 weeks in advance. That's crazy, right? That sounds crazy because we're shooting a movie, we're putting all this money in, and we have not cast the leads yet. So that was a bit nerve-wracking, but that's the way it is, and that's happened to me before on other movies, and it's very typical. Now with Harry and Kathryn, the good thing is I had a pre-existing relationship with Harry, so I knew I wanted him, so that was pretty easy, and he was a big fan of Detour, So it was just a matter of logistics of when it would work for his schedule. So I think we shifted things a little bit. And then, Kathryn, I did not know Kathryn. It took a while to kind of get to her. But we had a wonderful casting director, Judy Bowman, out in New York, who got her the project. And then it turns out I had another friend of mine who knew her, and he put in a good word. And then it finally came to fruition. But again, dealing with contracts and all that jazz, you have to deal with it in a few days. And it always, like, they were signing contracts on the day they showed up. I mean, but if the contracts weren't done, then they wouldn't be able to shoot. So it's really it's
stressful.
It's extremely stressful because you literally have to put the cart before the horse. You gotta get the machine moving and start making the film. But you also want the best actors you can get, and that's kind of the deal. And you want to, and for something like this, for those that don't know about scheduling feature films, like it was a 3.5 week shoot. I didn't need Harry and Kathryn at the beginning, even though they have one of the opening scenes, because we don't shoot in chronological order. In order to save time and money, you basically cluster all the locations together. Okay, so all the house stuff we're shooting out in a week, and all the stuff in the coffee shop where Bridget's rapping, we're going to shoot that out in 2 days, because it takes a lot of time and effort to put up the lights and take them down, then do a company move somewhere else, pack up the truck, etc. And it's also cheaper when you're paying actors like Harry and Kathryn to shoot them out as quick as possible. So we clustered all of their scenes together in a week. So there were some moments, like there's a scene with them where Harry's talking to his son, but the reverse coverage on the son we had already shot a week before. So now we're just getting that because why pay Harry to come in for that just reverse shot a week earlier? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. So how long had you been in contact with Kathryn Erbe's agent before she actually said yes?
Not really long. I mean, it was like,
so that was a last minute kind of a thing.
Yeah. Well, it was like the beginning of the shoot. It's like the shoot had begun, and then I don't think we had a commitment until like the first week of shooting, and then the next week we kind of solidified, and then she was there like that weekend. So it's
and
pretty wild.
Do you think having Harry on board helped?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Get her
I
on
mean,
board?
yeah, 100%. Because they're always, they want to know who they're playing against, right? Or I should say, with. That's their acting partner, and I think it always helps if you're going to name someone with name value to have another person who is also name value. The trouble is, how do you get that first person to say, okay, I'm in, without knowing anybody else? Because Harry wanted to be in it, but he's like, he really wanted to know who's going to play his wife, because why wouldn't he? Because that's going to affect, acting's reacting. It's going to affect his performance. So he signed on before knowing who was going to play the mother. But ultimately we got Kathryn, and she did a tremendous job. Both of them did.
And was your casting director pretty well known in the industry?
Yeah, she, she's very well respected in New York. Her name's Judy Bowman, and particularly with younger actors, she really has her thumb on the pulse of young actors, and that's what I needed for this film, because all the younger roles were going to be cast with up and coming people, or people that didn't have many credits, because they're only young actors only have so much a visibility out there. So we did tons of auditions, took at least a month of auditions for the younger roles. And then I had a list of people for the parents who I thought would be great, and we talked about like who to go to. But see, a casting director is so important. It's the most important thing you want to spend development or just say, development / early production money on, because agents and managers are brick walls to indie filmmakers. They only care about money. They want to know what the money is, how long, when it's happening, and they want a pay or play offer immediately, or they won't even let their client read the script. However, casting directors, they have relationships with these actors, sometimes even better relationships, because they're getting them jobs, right? So and they like to work with each other, and they have direct access to to actors most of the time. So that's sort of the workaround. But, you got to pay for the casting director. But casting directors, will often work because they like the film, or maybe some of them want, to go into producing eventually, and maybe some sort of producing credit can help. But once you get a casting director on your side, it makes things a hell of a lot easier, because suddenly, you're legitimate and they know these actors, right? So you need that bridge.
And once you have one of these stars on board, or interested at least, what's the process with the director? Do you have a phone call with the actor before they sign on, or?
Absolutely. Yeah, they won't sign on until they basically are comfortable working with you. So at the very least, a phone call. Ideally, you want to sit down and meet face to face with the actor, because you want to, and also for the director's sake, because the director should make sure that the actor gets that character, because they don't want to have the actor come in and make wrong choices, or just maybe they've misunderstood the character in some way. So you need to clarify things with the actor, and the actor wants to know that they can trust you, that you know what you're doing. The more work you do, the better. Like, I've had really great meetings with actors who were at first on the fence, but then committed to the film because I was on board, because I do all this work. I come in with this binder, which, I have every scene in the movie beaded out. So everything is analyzed. I have a 2-page chart for each scene. I have the whole movie storyboarded, shot listed, overheads, the whole thing. And I go in there, I have a PowerPoint presentation. I take them through my vision of the film, front to back, and they're in. I mean, it's the more work you do as a director in pre-production, and in production, right? The more work the people around you will do, because if you're bringing your A game and the slacker to your left is bringing his C game, he's gonna look really bad. Mm-hmm. So and you get to tell him to do to up his game a bit, because you're working your ass off. So, and there's some directors that don't, and it's you set the tone from the top down. So it's hard. The amount of work that you want your collaborators to do, you have to be doing the most work initially. And that really, it becomes contagious. At least that's the hope.
So is this a private meeting with the actor, or is there?
Oh yeah.
Agents
Oh
involved,
yes.
Or?
Oh no agents. I wouldn't even do it with an agent there. This is finally they set it up, and I think no agent has ever tried to come to one of these meetings. It's kind of like a sacred thing. I mean, they like the script. They want to do the part. They just want to talk to the director. They might have ideas. You want to clarify. I knew Harry before, so that was a different situation. Kathryn I hadn't met in person until I met her on set, but we had the conversation. Another really great thing about No Alternative, which I'm unable to do, at least currently for any of my other films, is that it's based on a novel that I wrote. So what I did was I gave copies of the novel to all of the actors, at least all the main actors, and asked them to read it. I know it might be a lot. Here's a novel, read it, but it is the story, and the novel goes into so much backstory and emotional motivation for these characters that I almost didn't have to give them any sort of guidance or direction to begin with, because there's the complete emotional outline for all of these characters, and they all read it, and they were like, "Yeah, I don't really have many questions. I mean, it's all spelled out in the book."
So had you seen her in movies before, like What About Bob and?
Oh yeah,
Law and Order?
Always. Oh yeah, I love Kathryn Erbe. She's terrific, And
so what's that like then? Is it? Do you get nervous or?
Oh sure. I mean, the first day is nervous. You're nervous, and I mean, you want to make sure that they're listening to you, and you're listening to them. And the first day is really kind of a big test in a way for both parties. But I gotta say, I didn't have any problems with any actors, and I've had some issues in the past, and I'm not even. I'm not saying that in a bad way, because actors, I've directed a lot of dark movies, and they have to bring real dark, raw emotions to the film. So yeah, if they're in a crabby mood, I understand. If the performance is working, that's great. I would only be concerned if for some reason a negative attitude is negatively impacting the film or the people around that person. I've never had that happen. And in Kathryn and Harry's case, I mean, they were just dreams to work with. I mean, always in positive moods and listened to everything that, all my direction. When they had an idea, they would pose it to me, and it was, I mean, kind of a dream. And actors like that, they just, there's a reason why you hire them, because you're behind the camera, and all of a sudden, the first take we did with Harry was his big monologue. The first shot was his big monologue in the first opening scene with the family, and he was basically, we were shooting as we were rehearsing a little bit. First take, not so good. Second take, not so good. And then it was like, third take, oh, I see why he's Harry Hamlin. Like, oh, okay. Then something clicked, and boom, it's like perfect. I knew it was perfect. And then after I call cut, we look at each other, and he says to me, yeah, that's the one. It's like, yeah, it is. Moving on. So it's kind of that those kind of moments are just, pretty amazing.
And I can imagine for a director working with stars that if there was an issue where they didn't trust you or they began not to trust you, that would be a tough situation.
It would be really tough. And it happens all the time in Hollywood too.
Yeah. And you wrote about in your book about a star that was attached or at least interested in your first film, Detour.
Correct. Yes.
Not your first film, but one of your first films.
Feature film.
First feature. And he didn't want you to be the director. He wanted somebody else. And
that is absolutely correct.
Kind of held that over you.
Yeah, so, this is a guy, I mean, talk about it in the book, but I guess I'll leave his name out here. If you're interested, listeners, go get the book and check it out. But,
yes. And what's the name of the book, by the way?
Detour Hollywood, How to Direct a Micro-Budget Film. So we had the interest of a well-known actor who was a really big TV star, then went into movies and, did well for a while, but kind of, this is a point where the career was, hadn't done as much. But in any event, I mean, he was open to doing an indie film, and he liked the script a lot. And we met a couple times just going through the script. He had some really great ideas, and I took them, and, great conversations, like dream conversations. And then, we're getting closer to having him sign the contract, and his agent, calls my producer and is like, my client wants to sit down with you guys and talk. Anyway, so he took my producers out to lunch and basically said, yeah, I love the script. I really like Will, but I don't want him to direct it. I want, I don't think he's able to direct this. How he would know that, I'm not sure. But and he basically pitched his friend directing the movie, and they kind of get it. He gave them a film of his, and he hadn't done much. I think I had actually done more than him. So it seemed pretty clear that he wanted his friend to direct the movie. And my producers, they were kind and polite to him in the moment, but the next day called his agents like, no, it's Will. Everybody approves Will. Investors have already approved Will. There's no reason, it's his movie. Like, we're not going to do that. And agent's like, fine, that's great. Okay, we're ready to sign. But he wants to have, my client wants to have one more conversation with Will over the phone. So, all right. Great, whatever. We'll talk and then we'll lock this up. So he calls me that night and proceeds to try to pitch me on why I shouldn't direct my own movie. So kind of giving it one last shot, as though I would buckle and say, "Oh, you're right. I don't think I'm ready to direct this." Meanwhile, I'm the same age as this person, and I've had more life experience because I haven't been on a set all my life. So it's really it was kind of a wake up call moment, and just I almost had a panic attack on the phone because I didn't know how to react. Like, how do you react to that? But eventually I was like, look, if I know, you're bringing value to the project, which is great, and the investors like you, which is great, and I think you would be great too. But if you don't trust me as a director, please don't do this movie, because it's, this is the most of this movie is one man in a car. And if you don't trust my vision, it's never going to work. So it's going to be a disaster. And I was like, I don't want you to do the film if you're not going to trust me. And then eventually, he said he trusts me, but it kind of, it had poisoned the well, if you will. And we ended up parting ways and moving on. But it was...
you found somebody else, so...
Yeah, well, and it turned out very well, because Neil Hopkins was the right person for the role. And I went to college with Neil. He was in my AFI thesis film Shadowbox, so we had a great relationship. And he's a wonderful actor, and he put his all into it. And I don't think, I'm not sure if I would have got that level of commitment with other actors, because it was a tough role. The car's crumbling around you, you got mud all around you all freaking day. It's it's a lot claustrophobic. It's not dangerous per se, but it was pretty terrifying to be an actor in those situations.
And I think the way you handled that is a pretty good case study for any director that is trapped in that situation. You stood your ground. It's your film, right?
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
Yeah.
You have to. I mean, I think you gain respect that way. And the thing that liberated me too was I made that. Well, my co-writer Dwight and I wrote that script to literally make for nothing. The whole point of that was because I graduated from film school right at the beginning of the writer's strike, which is a terrible time to graduate film school, and there's no work out there. So any connections I had weren't going anywhere through like the conventional route. So it's like, well, I got to do something. So let's write something we could literally do for $10,000 in a garage with dirt, a couple wheelbarrows full of dirt, a junker we get from Craigslist, and my DP and an actor, and then we'll do it. So I knew like I could walk away from the Hollywood version of this movie anytime. I don't need these investors' money. Like I can just go make this. So why should I compromise so much when I know I can make this movie the way I want and actually make it,
Nice. Will, before we let you go, I just want to ask you a quick question on the book is a second edition. Now, what's different about the book now other than the intro by Harry Hamlin?
Yeah, so you're talking about No Alternative, the book.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, so we No Alternative was just re-released. That was my first novel, came out in 2012, and obviously it's the movie, it's the book on which the movie is based. But it's a brand new edition with the art, the cover art from the film, and it features a foreword by Harry Hamlin, which is it was very kind of him to do, which he gives his take on the book, and on his role in the film. And then there's an additional afterword that I wrote that delves into the behind the scenes of the movie, kind of the origin of how I adapted it, and some of the pitfalls, and just kind of a general overall experience of making No Alternative, the book, into No Alternative, the movie. And it was released just last week, and is available on Kindle and paperback on Amazon.com. Same name, No Alternative. Check it out
just
now.
A different cover, picture.
Exactly.
So tell us again how we can see the movie.
Well, it's available right now for purchase or rental on the majority of major platforms like iTunes, Amazon, Google Play, Redbox, and all cable providers around the country. It's on demand. It's also available on Blu-ray and DVD through Amazon. And August 16th will be the big streaming release, where it'll be streaming on Amazon Prime. So those who are Amazon Prime subscribers, you can watch the film anytime for no extra money. So I recommend that too.
Perfect. And anybody listening wants to talk to you, have a question, are you open to that? And if you are, how can they do it?
Well, absolutely. I recommend checking me out on my website, which is williamdickersonfilmmaker.com. I'm available on social media. My handle's @WDFilmmaker. Find me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. And if you want to email me, feel free to email me at contactwilliamdickerson@gmail.com.
All right. Thank you, Will.
Yes,
Always
thank
great
you
having
guys
you on.
it's always a pleasure to be on with you guys. I appreciate you having me.
Thanks so much. So Forris, he's right about the M&Ms. We looked it up. 1995. That's when the blue M&Ms started. So
Yeah, M&Ms have actually, over the years, since I was a kid, kind of done lots of different color changes and. But hey, that's marketing.
And holiday colors, yeah. It used to be that they took out the red for a while because they thought it was dangerous, and then they brought it back.
Yes, the dye, the red dye or the yellow dye number something,
But the one complaint I have is that they actually got rid of the tan M&M to bring in the blue, and that was disappointing to me.
They all taste the same to me. I mean, to me, I'm like, hey, thankfully we have high fructose corn syrup to replace, the dangerous dyes that were in M&Ms. So
okay, pseudoscience. Well, that's our show for today. We have some great interviews coming up with Ben Yinney, the Gorilla representative, is going to be talking about film financing, and we also have a show about editing coming up for us.
Yeah,
at some point. And I'm going to be talking a little bit more about suspense. So definitely hit the subscribe button. Get Real Indie Filmmakers is created by Forris Day Jr., host of Rolling Tape, and they might not realize that you're also an audiobook narrator.
Yes, I got like 80 books out there with, they're all more how-to type of books. There's a couple of travelogue type of books, but most of them are how to play cards and how to do this. Just if you go to Audible, search my name.
And we'll put a link in the show description.
All right.
So if you like his voice, there is more.
And the show is also produced by you, Jeffrey Michael Bays.
Oh, yeah.
You're an author of Between the Scenes, what every film director, writer, and editor should know about scene transitions. And then your latest book, Suspense with a Camera, A Filmmaker's Guide to Hitchcock's Techniques. I can't recommend that one enough. It's awesome.
Well, you could recommend it enough, but you don't.
Well, I recommended it. I just recommended it more.
Bye, Blondie.
Get Real Indie Filmmakers is a production of Borges Networks, 2019.